All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started with the House Higher Education Committee meeting. Thank you, everyone, for being here. John hasn't taken roll, but I think what we'll do is we'll start with you, Shirley, so that you can explain some budget things. And I understand we had some questions that were asked at the last meeting that you'd like to address. So, Shirley Morrow, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I came with show and tell today. So the first thing I wanted to do is I was corrected last week after the meeting was over, which happens often. I'll get an email or something that said you misspoke. One of the things that I want to explain and that was questioned last week is I mentioned the IBARS data, which is the data that we use to put together the budget analysis, and there's the agency's request and the governor's recommendation. IBARS stands for Internet Budget and Reporting System. That is not our accounting system. Our accounting is the SMART system, but IBARS gets the numbers from the SMART system, and SMART stands for the Statewide Management Accounting and Reporting Tool. So that's the whole picture that I didn't explain last week. The other thing I wanted to talk very quickly about is we had quite a few questions about capital improvements when we went over the bill. And even though, again, the bill becomes law and the bill has the different funds in it for capital improvements, there's a lot more to the story when it comes to capital improvements. So I just kind of wanted to explain that a little bit. In statute, agencies that have capital improvements, which would mean they own and operate state-owned buildings, they have to, by statute, provide a 5-year capital improvement plan to the Joint Committee on State Building Construction. And our chair of this committee sits on that committee and is very familiar with this process. So during the interim, and what I brought you is the university's 5-year capital improvement plan, and it's tabbed for each of the universities. What they have to submit to the legislature is a couple of different forms. One is a 418A, which is a spreadsheet of every capital improvement project, how much it's going to cost, and what funds will be used to construct that project. In addition, each line item in this form has a 418B, which is a description of the project funding or budget broken out by the different line items, and then again, how many years and what funding sources for those projects. So that will go before Joint Committee on State Building Construction every year. They present a 5-year plan. And then again, during session, the analyst, which would be myself, will come before Joint Building Committee and will present again the capital improvement projects for just whatever budget years we're looking at during that session. So that would be for this session, the current year of fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023. So capital improvements gets looked at more than once and in quite a bit of depth. So I just wanted to kind of add to that story a little bit. The other thing that was talked about was in this committee, after you hear budgets, you will make recommendations to the full committee of House Appropriations. And what the chair of this committee will present to House Appropriations is what we call a subcommittee report. And what I've provided to you in yellow is last year's full, complete subcommittee report. So this is a combined report because after we've reported out of the House and the Senate, we combine the House and Senate together. The first agency on the front is the Senate, because last year, post-secondary education reported out of the Senate first. So it goes first on the report. But if you will flip over 2 more pages to page number 4, that is the start of the House Budget Committee report. And you will see there's an agency request. That is information that comes straight out of the budget analysis that we write up. And then there's a governor's recommendation explanation. And then you will see we have a heading called the House Budget Committee recommendations, were your recommendations last year. So there were 6 recommendations that came out of this committee. And then there's a heading for the full committee, the House Committee recommendations. And they concurred with this committee's recommendations. But you'll notice there's another heading that says further House Committee recommendations. What happens in House appropriations is the chair will report out the recommendations of this committee. And once all agencies have reported out, the committee then looks at the budget as a whole. And at that time, they make further recommendations on anything they want to bring up. So you can see that there were 3 additional recommendations that were added by House Appropriations. And then we had the Committee of the Whole, which is the floor action, a conference committee, which would be the conference between the House and the Senate. And you'll notice it's broken out. You've got K-State University, Extension, Vet Med. In conference committee, some of the Senate action was to put money back in that the governor had taken out. Then you'll notice on page 8, if you'll remember last year, we had a mega bill before break. So you will see that there's some governor's veto action because the governor vetoed a couple of things that were in the mega bill. And then we had an omnibus bill, so we had additional action that was taken. And last but not least, we had a veto on the omnibus bill, and those are some of the things I talked about when we looked over the appropriations bill. This last one was the $500,000 from stem cell research for KU Medical Center. And then on the last page, once session is over, we reconcile all the numbers with division of budget, and then we put a table together of all the final numbers. So this document, in essence, tells you everything that was done by either the House or the Senate the entirety of last session.
Very good. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
The last thing I will talk about a little bit is we've had some questions, some pretty generic, general questions about the universities, how many students, how much SGF, things like that. So I'm just going to remind the committee that in the Board of Regents webpage, they have data books. These are a wealth of knowledge, and I can pass these around if you want to look at them. They have lots of charts and graphs and tables. They have peer institutions throughout the United States they compare themselves to. And then they also have, again, lots of colorful charts and graphs broken out, the different parts and pieces of their budget. So there's one for the state universities. There's a separate one just for the technical colleges. A much larger one for the 19 community colleges. And last but not least, a little tiny one for Washburn. Not that they're tiny, but it's just one university. So if there are specific questions that you have about the budget that are pretty generalistic, I can guarantee the answer you can find in the data books. And if anybody wants hard copies of the data books like I do every year, just let me know, and I will get them from the board office.
You anticipated my next question.
As a matter of fact, I was given the state universities is done for this year, and I was given 2 copies, if anybody wants to fight over them.
I think we'll let the chairman decide if she wants them first. So, yes, Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Shirley, this is a really dumb question, but we're talking budgets. Something I've been thinking about. It seemed like over the last, 3 years, we've had so many interim presidents of the CEOs of our institutions have resigned, retired, whatever. So that's not budgeted typically. So how does that money get derived? And maybe this may be, you may have to do some digging, but I know, we have, there's a part of that for salaries of CEOs, but then there's an adjustment. So I'm just trying to think, does that money still stay from within the, okay, I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole, but are there several pools of money when we talk about salaries because CEOs versus the rest, or what happens, say, like with Wichita State we had our interims. Now we have an interim in Emporia State. K-State, we've kind of got, looks like it's going to be, if there's going to be some lap over, I don't know for sure. But anyway, how is that accounted for?
Okay, I'm going to try and answer it, but I'm going to give you a caveat that someone from the Board of Regents will come and explain it much better than I will. The CEO's salary specific comes from the Board of Regents. They set those salaries themselves. And during a board meeting, they might go into executive session to discuss personnel matters, and that's one of those, is the CEO's salary. Now, one of the things you asked about was the pool of money. Each university has multiple pools of money. Salaries can come from state general fund, tuition dollars, restricted, federal. It really depends what that employee at that university does. If they're specific to a research project, then that money comes from that research project. If it's specific to something else, that otherwise most employees get a mixture of funds, and that's set by the university. The CEOs are set by the Board of Regents. The university set the employees. And that's about as far as I'm going to go before I get into trouble. But
Maybe remind me when Dr. Flanders is here that I can, because I mean, while I understand that, I guess we talked a lot in which committee it was about gaps or something with a meeting I was in. Not sure this is like gap insurance, but that is almost like an off-budget deal. So I guess we'll ask, but that would be. So if we have an interim, like an Emporia State, the regents at their next meeting after that, they sat down and said, okay, the interim salary will be X, and so it's in a sense in that same, I hate to use that word, but that same silo as other monies for CEOs within our institutions? Or am I going too deep right now?
You're going a little too deep for me. I'm going to leave that for them to explain the interims, because those might be a little bit different.
I'm just curious to try to piece this all together. So that's all. So, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any other questions? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like to take you up on all of those books. So
Okay, absolutely.
Whatever that.
That's why I brought them after we discussed earlier. I thought maybe you would like a set.
All right, thank you.
All right.
And again, they're online if you're more of an electronic user. I'm a paper person.
Okay. Yeah, I am too. So, all right. Very well. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is start performance-based budgets. Now, as you may remember, a few years ago, there was some legislation passed that the agencies needed to submit performance-based budgets. And Legislative Research worked with Division of Budget and came up with a spreadsheet type system where the agencies would break out their agency by department, or not department, by program, and budget accordingly and describe the programs and whether they were part of statutes, if the program was in statute, or what the programs entailed. Just this last session, there were additional communications about performance-based budgets. So again, KLRD worked with Division of Budget and came up with a new spreadsheet, which you will see in these wonderful notebooks that you have. We have provided you not only the higher education agencies, but we've given you every agency so that you can look at all of them. There is a table of contents that breaks out by function of government. So if you'll go to the education section, and I don't have a notebook in front of me, I think it's like page 49 or something.
Yes, 49.
The very first page that you look at, unfortunately, the headers are programs for that agency. To find out what agency that is, you have to look at the footer. And the footer is going to be K-12. So you have to go through and find the agencies. And David Fye will be the first presentation. He's going to present Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, and he's going to tell you what page number he's on. So I just wanted to kind of give you a introduction to your notebook, and we have 2 performance-based budget presentations today, and then we'll have some more next week.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Any other questions for our KLRD, our amazing?
And if
Shirley.
I may just note, next week will be the last week we have for committee before we start budget presentations. In addition to finishing up the performance-based budgets, I'm going to spend one day just going over the new budget analysis template. So if there are any other suggestions for information that you would like prior to starting budget hearings, or anything that I can explain to help you make better decisions prior to the budget hearings, let me know and we'll fit it in next week.
Okay, sounds good. Everyone knows how to get a hold of Shirley correctly. Okay. All right, thank you very much, Shirley. And then we will move on to Mr. David Fry, Executive Director of the Behavioral Science Regulatory Board. That sounds like a tongue twister you might use at a party. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity coming before you. My name is David Fye, and I am the Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. And in your booklet, our performance measures are found starting on page 130. So we'll be on page 130 and 131. I also provided a couple of pages of extra testimony for you just to frame our performance measures a little bit and to tell you a little bit more about our agency. So I believe that was sent to you electronically, but I'll just hit some high points in that testimony just so that you understand a little bit more about our agency prior to diving into those performance measures. As I mentioned, we are the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, and we're generally referred to as the BSRB. We regulate most of the state's mental health professionals. And the testimony there, you'll see that we regulate and license 7 unique professions. The largest group being social workers, but there's also a number of professional counselors, marriage and family therapists, addiction counselors, licensed psychologists, master's level psychologists, as well as behavior analysts. In total, there's a little over 14,000 permanent licenses under the agency. We are a public protection agency, so it's important to note that our mission, as created by the Kansas Legislature, is to protect the public in terms of individuals who receive services from those practitioners. And we do that in two main ways, and that's how our programs are divided. First, by licensure and renewal, and then secondly, through investigations and discipline. We are a small state agency. We currently have 9 full-time employees, including myself. The majority of the staff work on licensing responsibilities, though we do have 1 full-time investigator, and another staff member splits their time between licensing and also the investigations. We are funded entirely by fee funds, so we don't receive any money from the State General Fund, and we also don't receive any federal money, and we are one of the state agencies that contribute 10% of our revenues to the State General Fund.
If I might interrupt you, we have really good audio in this room.
Okay,
So if you feel free to step back a little bit.
sure.
You're doing a great job. I'm not trying to tell you you're doing anything wrong, but we are really, or lift up the microphone a little bit. Maybe it won't be quite in your face.
Okay, is that a little bit better from right there? Okay. Sure. Okay, great. Well, so I'll go back to the document before you, the performance-based budget. So all agencies were asked to submit a revised budget estimate in September, and we submitted our budget. We submitted our revised budget estimate in September. When we submitted our revised budget estimate, we were asked to submit performance measures, and we included 14 performance measures when we submitted our budget. Performance measures, and so we included 9 of those in the template in front of you, split between additional technology, and we've developed a telework policy as well. So we have a couple of investigators working from home here and there, but then we also have done some new technology changes. We've been replacing some of our outdated computer equipment with some different laptops and other technology through desktop as a service through the state. And we also have a big step forward in terms of technology. We have replaced our credit card processing system. In general, the previous method was through a snail mail type method of processing those payments, and it led to some delays. But I'm happy to report that we have completely transitioned that.
Well, his, no. Well, mine is, but I don't know about his. Did it turn off by itself?
Okay.
There you go.
It's back on again, so great. Okay. We were asked to identify some program goals for our license and renewal program. And the first two goals are tied closely together. One of our goals is to grant licensure to applicants who meet the statutory standards by reviewing applications in a timely manner, determining whether sufficient information has been provided to evaluate these criteria, and following up for additional information when necessary. The second goal is also to do the same for renewals. And then our third goal is to spend agency funding responsibly in this program to effectively process those requests while avoiding unnecessary expenditures.
Okay. Are there any questions? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While you're on your goals, this came up in one of the bills that went through for last year, having to do with military people being licensure from outside the states, outside the state of Kansas, and their ability to get licensure in Kansas. And there seemed to be some kind of challenges of getting that done through some of the different departments. And so that was just for military folks. What was your take when that bill came through, as far as being open to licensing someone that had 4 or 5 years worth of experience with full certification from New York City or New York coming to Kansas? What was your comments on that?
Yeah, and Madam Chair, I believe you're referencing House Bill 2066 that passed this past session, and that did call for some expedited licensing timeframes for military members, military spouses, and some other individuals. Yeah, when that bill did pass, we did provide notice to licensees, and we put some information on our website about that. And we changed our forms to go ahead and identify individuals who fit in those categories so that we can properly track them and expedite those licenses. So we have done our best to go ahead and do that. It does, you look for a similar scope of practice as part of one of the requirements of that bill. And so I think we've been doing a pretty good job of identifying those and expediting those licenses.
So as a follow-up to that, so what you're saying is your department was relatively positive about bringing in out-of-state people, professionals, and get certified in Kansas to get them working in Kansas, at least for the military. My addition to that is, if we have other folks that come from California, Idaho, Michigan, and they have similar licenses that are certified in another state, are you going to be open to them coming here, and we'll certify them and get them working here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're charged with is to protect the public. So we want to make sure that that individuals meet the qualifications for licensure. But yeah, if they fit into those categories and they're either moving to Kansas or they have the intent to move to Kansas, even if they're not the military individuals, we want to go ahead and expedite those as well. And it's going to take a little bit of time for us to make sure that those individuals are following all the instructions for professional conduct in Kansas, but we are expediting those timeframes as well.
Yes, Representative Riley.
Follow-up question to that. So what's a little bit of time? Because that has been the challenge. So what do you consider a little bit of time?
So for the military members and military spouses, the bill called for when all the necessary information has been received, they should be processed within 15 days. For the non-military individuals, the bill called for that to be, once all the information that's needed is received, it should be within 45 days. So it's a different time frame, but those are expedited also more quickly than what was the standard before that.
I had a quick question, and this is maybe kind of out of what you were going to be talking about, but do you require criminal background checks for these individuals?
So for individuals who apply for licensure, we have questions on the form. So if they're coming from another jurisdiction, we can check with the National Practitioner Database to see if there's any history of that. There's also some questions that if there are certain types of felony convictions or convictions with crimes against persons, we collect information on that. But that's the information that we correct, including background checks on those individuals.
Okay, so you don't hire a separate group to do criminal background checks. You do most of it yourself in-house. All right, thank you. Yes, Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with the background checks, would there be certain people that would be disqualified from getting a license if they had a criminal record, or how exactly does that work then?
So there's not an absolute bar based on someone's previous convictions. If there are previous felony convictions or previous convictions that would be crimes against persons, we would collect information to look for things like the circumstances surrounding that and any rehabilitation or any efforts, how long ago that was, things like that. And then all of that would be taken to the board with legal counsel to review that. And ultimately, it would be up to the board to determine if they should be licensed or not. And on some of those felony convictions, it does require 2/3 of the board to vote to license by statute.
Do you have another one? No.
You know, I just tend to think that, you know, a lot of times when people have criminal convictions, there are times where they can be, you know, rehabilitated, or they can, you know, become better people as a result. And so, you know, I don't really like the idea of just having a blanket policy of saying, you know, anybody who has had a criminal conviction, you know, can't be licensed. But, you know, what you described sounds like a good and reasonable policy.
And there are circumstances where someone, it's not uncommon for individuals to pursue licensure if they've been involved in a certain circumstance, or, you know, they've gone through certain steps to rehabilitate and they want to give back or help individuals. And so a lot of it depends on the circumstances, but there's not an absolute bar. That information will be collected, and then the board will review it and then determine if they fit the qualifications for licensure.
Okay. Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. If I refresh my memory, we talked about this last year about you needing another investigator, correct? Or am I thinking of a different agency?
I think that might have been a different agency.
Okay. So, then probably the next one that comes. Okay. These performance-based deals, I've been one that kind of thought, as I reviewed them, and I voted for this performance-based budgeting. Does that help you? Are these goals? I mean, I guess what I felt, and that's one of the reasons why it got tweaked, I felt that it was simply a matter of finding 5 things, filling out the form, throwing something up there, and it didn't really show that you know, it was more like a game for everybody to just fill it in and say, okay, well, we've done our job, rather than really focus in on the agencies. And okay, these are our. And again, I'm not picking on you. I'll probably ask this of everybody that might get a chance to. If you believe that over the time, I know you've only been executive director in a couple of years, but is that helping you in the process beyond just the financial, but the meeting, you know, their program goals? And just be honest. I mean, that's the only way we can all improve. It's just what your opinion is.
I believe it will. As you mentioned, I came on board but a little over a year ago as director, and so we are making a lot of changes with the way that we track information and try to split out expenditures. And we also are a smaller agency, and so we have a budget under $1 million, and so we really just have one program and 2 sub-programs. And so I think in looking at some of these performance-based budgeting type of objectives, like is this program required or is it, you know, discretionary? With our agency, we're a little on the small side when looking at something like that. For a larger agency, perhaps with a much bigger budget where they have 7 or 8 programs, I think you can kind of see some of more of the details. So for us, with all of the changes that we're going through right now, it may be a little early to start to track some of those long-term adjustments with the performance-based budgeting, but I think it will be helpful looking back and trying to look at what our goals are and are we really funding those goals between the programs.
Well, okay. The output measures, we're looking at a number of reported violations reviewed. I know you can go back now and see. So when you do the out years of that, is that based on a hunch, based on, I mean, it's because you don't know how many people are going to violate or how many investigations. And again, if you have only one investigator, is that adequate? Is that, I guess, are you always starting, say, at whatever that number is, 100, it's just like 178 to 185 as we look at the out years now, or so is that kind of based on that 3-year average as you come up with numbers, just to be, and again, I know it's like I'm being nitpicky. I'm just trying to figure out, again, on these smaller agencies, how all this pieces together, because I kind of agree with you that a much larger agency, it's much different than trying to put, a 20-page form on something that probably only has 5 pages worth of data rather than somebody that probably could even give us more. And so just trying to see if that something moving forward that we need to maybe look at A and B when it comes to this, so that it's not just a taking of your time and not really something that's beneficial not only to you as the agency but us as the state.
Sure. And you were referencing some of the statistics on page 131, the investigation discipline program, and then under the output measures, the number of reports of alleged violations reviewed. Those numbers for the out years for 22 and 23, prior to fiscal year 19 and 20, we were seeing the numbers right around there. They were starting to tick up in fiscal year 19 and 20, and then we had a really unusual number during a lot of the pandemic in 2021. It dipped very low to 132. So we don't exactly know why that was, but we do know that it went far below what we would generally expect to see. And so based on the numbers since the start of the fiscal year, we used that and historical trends to bring it back up to the 178 and 185. We also know that the state of Kansas entered SIPAC, a multi-state compact for professional or licensed psychologists, and because of that, there will be additional psychologists practicing in Kansas. So we expect there to be some increase at some point because of other practitioners in Kansas, and so that's kind of how those numbers were estimated. And going towards what you were talking about in terms of the cost per report of alleged violation reviewed, that's a little difficult. When you look at this table, those numbers are, I think, going to be helpful in a couple of years. And part of that is because prior to the time that I came to the agency, they would have planned expenditures and they would try to apportion that based on the staff that they had as investigators and the staff they had in licensing. But when the bills were actually paid with a staff of 9, it really is paid from just one spot. And so all those expenditures were included in the licensing program rather than the investigation program. So whereas 15% when you represent planned expenditures for things like rent or computer services or our legal attorney fee from the Attorney General's office, while we try to split those out to show planned expenditures, when the bills are actually paid, we get assistance through the Office of Fiscal Management, and they go ahead and pay the bill, but it's really just paid from one source. And so, unfortunately, that's historically been reflected in one sub-program. So we're working with them to try to get that split out a little bit better so you can kind of see more of the separation, but that's kind of a work in progress.
Does anyone else have a question? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so going down the questioning about investigations, and this is leading on to some other stuff, but so what would you say, without that number being here, what is the cause of most of those investigations?
So I'd say the most prevalent, given the number of licensees we have, So we have a certain number that are audited randomly every year. And we have individuals who receive notice that they're being audited. We want to review their continuing education hours. And some of those individuals don't respond to the audit. And so for some of those, we do a report from the office if they're delinquent and responding to the audit, or if they indicated that they got all their continuing education hours, but they really were short, then those would be referred to the Complaint Review Committee. I would say that those are one of the most prevalent reports of alleged violation. There are also, we receive complaints against practitioners for individuals who are upset about the services that they may have received, or someone who is connected to them may have received. For example, we have cases where there are foster children and they receive an evaluation, and maybe a parent is upset about some report that was filed. And so I think those tend to be some of the most common, but some of them are much more complex, including dual relationships that are alleged for a practitioner being too close to someone who they're providing services to, or things like that. So I guess what I'm getting to is that there's a wide range. And so some of these could be investigated quickly. Some of them require much more time and more records to be collected.
So basically what you're saying is, in most cases, just from what you were saying, it's not a major offense against a citizen. A lot of times it's, I don't know what that number is, but you didn't get enough CEUs, so therefore we want to know why, that kind of thing. That's not hurting anyone right off, that they didn't get enough continuing education. But the case where they have ethics problems, and again, we were going down the road of talking about felonies and stuff like that from outside people, but if you have some ethics questions, that could be a problem, right? And so we discussed a little bit about the background of people coming from other states and coming here, and you talked about, you know, doing background checks as far as you know, felonies, misdemeanors, all that kind of stuff. That person could have some kind of cases held against them or in process of behavioral health in that state that had to do with ethics questions. Would that come up in your investigation also?
Yes, so we do ask, when we renew licenses, we ask, since the date of your last renewal, have you been convicted of certain crimes, or have there been ethical issues like you mentioned? And individuals coming from other jurisdictions, we ask them similar questions so that we can not only catch individuals when they're initially licensed, but also when they come up for renewals as well.
Okay, thank you. That answered my question.
Okay. Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know we're a budget committee, and so we're dangerously close to going in places we probably shouldn't go. So I'll do this. So instead of my other question, I mean, you know, you've been in this now over a year. It's, you know, there's kind of that lost year in there, so I kind of maybe get confused over the last couple of years. So what have you learned? Because you come from the state as well, and now into this position. What have you learned? What can we as this committee or others do to help make your job better?
Well, I appreciate
the agency. I
appreciate that question. If you don't mind, I may take a rain check on it and bring that answer back when I come and talk about the budget. but I appreciate that. So.
All right, thank you. You may go ahead.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to touch upon that we did our best to split out the expenditures and then some historic numbers here in terms of not only licensing and renewals, but also in terms of the investigation and discipline. It's also important to know that a report of alleged violation does not mean that an actual violation was determined. However, as a public protection agency, our agency does have a duty to investigate any complaints against practitioners. And so that goes into really the performance of the office, the work that the investigators do. And so that was we tried to factor that into the number of hours that would be spent and then the cost on that topic. And as I mentioned, you know, when you look at the cost per report of alleged violation, the two numbers that I would look to would probably be the planned expenditures in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. One thing, as a fee-funded agency, we have a certain amount of funding within our overall budget that is for, should cases be appealed and go to a higher level of appeal with the Office of Administrative Hearing. It's critical that we have that funding available to take those cases to that level. In fact, in the appropriations bill, when our budget was initially approved last year, there's a line in the budget bill that says that there's no limit for those types of expenditures, but for our agency in total, we do have an overall limit on our fee fund. And as a small agency, I know some bigger agencies might have a separate litigation fund, but since we're all rolled into one, we budget in case we need that funding. But of course, we're always looking to be good custodians of the funding. So if we don't need to spend that money, of course, we don't spend it. And if the money is not spent, it doesn't go anywhere, it stays in the fund. A couple years ago, the agency, the board, did lower fees for licensees. And so based on projected expenditures, that was going to lead to a deficit. And eventually we may need to look at whether fee increases should be considered. But I'm happy to report, based on some savings related to the expenditure, the pandemic, and other fewer expenditures than previously planned, I don't believe we'll need to look at that, at least for a few years. So,
Are there any other questions? Maybe I wasn't listening closely, but when I see the performance measures on the cost of investigating violations, it went from 488 to 790. Is that because you've added in the chance of appeal? Am I reading that correctly?
So that's part of it. Part of it is that historically they tried to allocate, the agency did try to allocate planned expenditures based on percentage of staff in one program versus the other. So for big expenditures on things like rent or our yearly contract with the Attorney General's Office for Legal Services, and I think there's a couple other items, they tried to split the cost when budgeting so that you would see that 85% of expenditures would go towards licensing and 15% would go towards investigation and discipline. But with an agency our size, there's one copy machine that is shared between all staff, whether you're investigations or whether you're licensing. So when a lot of these expenses are actually paid, it really just gets reflected in one program versus how it was originally planned. So that's why when you look back, you'll see almost no expenditures in certain years, and there definitely were expenditures. It really just had to do with the method that it was reflected in the records. So we are trying to, going forward, we're trying to reflect those expenditures a little cleaner. But then part of it too is that in 22 and 23, there is some funding set aside should the agency need to bring in experts for those hearings, or should we have the more costly administrative hearings, we need to have that funding available. Now, we hope that we won't have to spend it, but it's imperative that we have it available in case we need to. And like I said, if we don't spend it, it doesn't go anywhere, it stays in the fund, but we need to have the authority to spend it in case those cases do get appealed to a higher level.
Okay, that answers my question. Anyone else have a question? Are you? Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you saying then somewhere that you have a contingency fund that you build into your budget? Is that what you're saying?
So this is, we only have one fund for the agency, but there is a certain amount of money that is budgeted should we need to bring in experts for some of those hearing cases. We have a yearly contract with the Attorney General's Office for basic legal services, but should cases be appealed to a higher level, which does happen from time to time, those cases are very expensive, and we have to treat that as a separate expenditure. So we do have some money budgeted for that purpose, and if we have those cases that are appealed, we'll need to spend that money, but if we don't have to spend that money, then it just stays in the fund.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll be coming back for the regular budget hearing, so if there's any additional questions, I'm happy to answer them at that time too.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate you being here and answering our questions. We often have lots of them.
Thank you for your time.
Is there anything else that anyone would like to bring up at this time? I think this is the end of our, we have one more? Ah, we have the library. Okay. I am so sorry. I'm ditching you. I'm trying to leave.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Members of the committee, is the audio, am I in the right place?
If it's the blue light's on, you're on.
Oh, it's red. It's okay.
Oh, it's red over there? Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't know what page the State Library is in the book. So, and I'm hoping that my printout is the same as your printout. But I thought I would just kind of talk about the State Library, the 3 different divisions, point out some things in our performance-based budget, and then answer any questions you might have. The State Library is divided up into 3 different divisions based off of 3 pretty unique customer bases or groups. The reference division, which I forgot to introduce myself. Sorry.
I apologize. I'm still trying to find where you are in the book. Does anyone have that number? All right.
Thank you. My name's Cindy Rube. I'm the acting state librarian. I'm also the director of reference. And so I know a lot more about the reference division budget than I do the other 2. But I will try to explain all 3 equally. So the State Library is divided into the Reference Division, the Statewide Services Division, and then the Talking Books Division. And all of our programs fall within those 3 divisions. So for all 3, we were asked the consequences of not funding the program.
Anyone who's looking, it's page 66, not 88. We might have a little, new glasses, or, I'm sorry to keep interrupting you. Please go ahead.
It's okay. So all 3 have different statutory basis. And would it be okay if I just went division by division rather than across all 3?
I think that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
The reference division pretty much goes back to the origins of the State Library in 1855, and I won't go into that detail, but I did enjoy researching that for this document. So we've pretty much been around since 1855. Our focus is on the government, state government. So we provide resources to state agencies, but also the legislative staff, so the executive and legislative branches. Also, we provide resources or assistance to the public who is using the legislative or has questions about the legislative or state government. And then also just people with questions in general. And then the 3rd program goal is that we preserve and provide access to publications of state government. So with that, we have a resource called Kansas Government Information Online Library, where we've digitized old state government documents and then also grabbed electronic web-based documents. And eventually, we hope to have a continuous stream of documents from historic times to the current times for all state agencies. We've set out performance measures where we've given totals and also average cost per use, and then output measures, and then we also have a funding source. Do you want me to go to the next division or answer questions about that?
Well, if I see a hand raised, we'll stop. If not, we'll just keep going ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
For statewide services, that division came around largely around the late 1800s, early 1900s, where the state library was reaching out to public libraries with a traveling library commission. But what they really were doing was encouraging resource sharing and collaboration among the public libraries in the state. That is now, a lot of what we do is providing online downloadable digital books in audio and ebook format to all the people of Kansas. Also databases that are the traditional databases of information that is in journals, and then also skill-based databases such as Learning Express, Job and Career Accelerator, Universal Class, Mango Learning. Those are provided to all Kansans. And then the third thing is resource sharing, where we provide a statewide catalog for all of the libraries to use and all the libraries input into that catalog. And then we assist them by providing an interlibrary loan mechanism that allows them to easily tell what libraries have a book, whether or not it's on the shelf, and then to get it into the hands of the user quickly. So with those, again, we have totals, we have cost per search, cost, searching, the output measures are a little different, where we measure searches in one kind of resource, and then the other is more sessions. So if it's a learning skill builder database, it's going to be the number of sessions as opposed to questions asked. And then more recently, last year, we did an RFP for our audiobook vendor, and we went from 2 vendors to 1. So we think that going forward, that will make a change where people might have had to have 1 account or the other, or may have had 2 accounts. You'll see 1 patron account. So the numbers will look a little different going forward with that. Okay. Then the third division is Talking Books. That division is located in Emporia, and it benefits people who are unable to use a traditional book, either because they have a visual impairment or maybe a physical impairment that prevents them from holding a book. We contract with another organization for Braille books, I believe, but nowadays most of the books are downloadable, and just recently we switched to something called BARD, which stands for, I'm not going to get this quite right, but I know the B is for Braille, and something, it's about downloadable books. I should have written this down. Oh, it's in my notes. NLS, Braille and Audio Reading Download. Anyway, it's been less than a year that we converted to this, and it's download on demand. One of the really nice things is that no one has to wait for a book to be returned. They can get it anybody can get it at any time. There's no limits on how many people can read that book. These books are furnished by the National NLS, National Library Services for the Blind. And see, the other thing that we do is we produce specialized reading that are Kansas books. So we do a lot of development in that way. And a couple of years ago, a Kansas book was in the top downloads. It was the book of Haunted Kansas, and we were in the top downloads for the month of October. Anyway, I just stand for questions.
I'll start with a comment. I just absolutely love the digital books, the audio books I can download. I have a 3-hour drive to the Capitol and back, another 3 hours. So I listen to I download quite a few books. So I'm deeply appreciative. And I know that I get an email every week about what's available. And I think it's a great resource for all of us, whether it's to make the time driving a little shorter, or it's to get some information. Representative Riley.
I also would like to, well, thank you, Cindy, for your presentation. I would like to also add that you didn't cover about your links to the different newspapers here, and I found that very useful kind of thing. It was in your letter that you sent out to all the legislators, and so you can actually get a daily copy of the Topeka paper or the Kansas City paper or the Wichita paper. Costs you nothing, and it's all visual, and you can read that. My question would be having to do with the your archives that you have. I know that we've had a chance to visit those before, and you have documentations and newspapers from early 1800s of settlers and newspapers and articles in the newspapers. So you were mentioning that you're trying to capture different electronic media that's coming in. So the example would be if a city or a county or a township or someone posted a legal document up on their webpage, would that be captured by your product or your software that you have so that the people 50 years from now would be able to see that legal document?
What we're doing is grabbing just state agency documents, so we wouldn't go to local agency. And the State Historical Society may be grabbing some of those local documents, and those may fall under their records.
So there is a push right now for the counties and the cities and townships to put all their records, legal notices and everything on the website. But if I wanted to, I could go back 5 years, 50 years, whatever, and I could go look at a newspaper article and I could see the legal notices from 50 years ago or 5 years ago or last month. Where on the web page for a city, county, or township, I wouldn't be able to find that now or 5 years from now.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what, because that's not something that we're not archiving that or saving that to our system, so we're not doing anything with local. But that may be something addressed by the Historical Society.
Thank you. It might also be something you can address that with local government committees. So thank you. Are there any other questions? Representative Rogers.
I have nothing to say, but I will say congratulations. Hopefully, you've been a long time here, and so I'm glad, hopefully, however long it takes, or if you want to stick in this position, that'd be fine. So, and thanks for being open again. That's great.
Yes.
I'm curious as a guy who talks for a living, really, on the talking books, and I know you're still learning all about that, but digital books produced, is there something within the library system to produce digital books as far as people that read those in, or how? Because I'm seeing some of these numbers like 15. We have 900 and some Kansas books, and whether we can't, I was curious about that, and then could you break down? Have you had a discussion with somebody on like children being served, schools being served, and the material circulated? Those numbers don't make a lot of sense to me.
These are all on talking books, right?
Yes, on the talking books. I'm looking at first line number 9, then 12, 13, 14, 15. If you could explain those numbers, kind of.
So the books that are produced, we use volunteers. We might use some staff, I don't know, but I know that the director has talked about recruiting volunteers and talking to people about coming in to be readers. Then they take their recording and they take out things like size and page turns and they clean it up. And then they
Just need volunteers.
Yeah. And we have like a recording booth.
I know somebody that talks, so you never know.
Okay, good,
That might
because
volunteer
we're
to do
looking
that.
for people.
I'm sorry, Representative. This is not the time nor place.
No, I'm not.
For a
It's
job.
again, it's volunteer. And for full disclosure, I was turned down for a job for the talking deal over at KU. So just keep that in mind. So luckily, you're not in front of us. No, I'm just
What
kidding.
does KU know that we don't?
Well, a lot. So, and then, but looking at that 12 through 15, of all the number of materials available, which is fine, circulated, okay. The difference between the children and the schools being served, and again, I hate to get into minutia, but I just want to make sure that it goes back to, I guess, my bug about performance-based. Are the numbers more than just numbers? I mean, is it really usable data?
Well, I think that, the children, getting the word out is sometimes difficult. And we have made efforts through the years to contact physicians, to contact librarians, schools, also to open it up so that they know that like now librarians can register people so that people don't have to necessarily go see their doctor or, so a larger number of people can register. Yeah, I think it's just, we haven't gotten the word out to probably as many kids as could be eligible.
Okay, I'm confused. What does a doctor have to do with somebody getting access to material at the state library?
Okay, so
I'm missing-
for talking books, you have to be eligible.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
See, that's
yeah.
my jumping to conclusions. Okay, now the numbers make
I
sense.
should have mentioned.
No. Again, that's something I have to work through on this data, and I know we're early enough that we don't have enough years, but I don't want it a lesson simply in filling in the blanks. I want to make sure that that's data that's good for you, the agency, and us, the appropriators, in a sense that it's worth your time to do that because we're actually getting usable data,
Right.
as we move forward. So it's not a. I just want to make sure the
Yeah.
data is actually usable. So that's good. I understand now. Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions? If not, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your joining our committee today.
Thank you, committee.
I just wanted to update you guys a little bit. I have very sad news. We're going to lose John after tomorrow. He's been asked to take over a Senate committee, and so I know I did too. But we've really enjoyed having you, John, and appreciate it. And I don't know who I'm going to ask to go run up to the 5th floor for me ever again. So I just wanted to let you all know, and we'll see you tomorrow. And Chairman Humphreys will not be here again tomorrow, so you have to put up with me. So thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.